This was the starting point for the SIP, or structural insulated panel roof job. The ridge beam and the sidewalls were topped with bevel plates. To make the plates, I laminated some 2x10s together and ripped both sides. I used the ridge beam itself while it was on the ground as my workbench for the long cuts. As usual, I drew a simple sketch to guide my work. The cuts were 5 1/4 inches wide, so I used a 16-inch circular beam saw that handles 6-inch cuts. To my pleasant surprise, the waste material from the cuts were perfect bevel plates for the sidewalls. I wish all my work was this lucky. I hired a crane owner-operator to lift the 1,500-pound beam in place and stand a 17-foot 10x10 post under it. The crane operator and I worked well together, so I had him come back for the panel work. Disaster struck right off on my roof project. The SIP panel manufacturer's driver drove his trailer off my driveway and spun the tires on his four-wheel drive. The company offered no help. The panels were about 20 foot long, weighed well over 300 pounds, and had to be manhandled off the trailer to the staging area. When the trailer straps were loosened, the load wanted to slide off down the hillside, requiring tedious rope work to pull the top panels off without losing the rest of them. I'm very fortunate that several friends and neighbors showed up that day to help unload the trailer, and they stayed with me through this nightmare. Unloading the trailer was the most difficult, the most time-consuming, and the most dangerous part of the roof project. Fortunately, nobody was seriously pinched or crushed. The panels were numbered and stacked in the order that they would be placed on the roof. Nobody on the installation crew, with the possible exception of the crane operator, had any experience with SIPs. The crew was all volunteer friends and neighbors. One friend, Paul, and I drove up a day early to prepare for the job. Paul and I were in the Army at the same time and in the same station overseas, but we didn't know each other until we became neighbors in town. We set up a ground crew workbench and ran a temporary electrical power line to it. We nailed up a couple of installation sketches to the cabin wall. One sketch showed the numbered panel layout, the other showed the screw and safety cleat placement. My general strategy was to do everything possible at ground level. In addition to placing the screws and cleats, the ground crew applied the construction adhesive and foam and placed the long eye bolts that the crane rigging hooked up to. My nephew worked inside from a scaffold. His primary role was to unthread the nut from the eye bolt once the panel was in place. The steady-handed crane operator positioned his rig so that he could see every panel down to its final position. We started with the panels away from the crane and worked towards him so that his view was never blocked. The ridge man, yours truly, and the ladder man on the sidewalls, Lyle, a co-worker from Hewlett-Packard, positioned and screwed the panels in place. Note that the ground crew placed the eye bolt hole off-center in the panel so that the suspended panel would mimic the slope of the roof as it was set in place. To ease the panel placement, I kept a 3/4 inch gap between the opposing panel ends along the ridge line. I filled the gap with expanding foam. I'll close with some random shots.